Michigan State Spartans take on Boston College on the road, with BC being a 6.5-point home favorite. Boston College last won this matchup in 2007 when they met in the postseason. It was between Jeff Jagodzinski and Mark D'Antonio, I believe, was the matchup here. And these two teams are similar in the sense that they have already overachieved their preseason expectations. Boston College is 2-1, competed in my mind with the top 10 Missouri team, smashed Florida State, destroyed Duquesne. Michigan State is 3-0, beating FAU close, beating Maryland in a close game. They finally got a dominant win over Prairie View A&M, which I kind of viewed as sort of a bye week anyway, and they came out and they handled business, winning 40-0. These two teams, again, they've exceeded preseason expectations. I do think they're well coached. Their quarterback play has a lot of upside to it, and their offensive lines and their defensive lines are underrated. Do not ignore the Spartans and the Eagles and what they can do in the trenches. Don't ignore it. Looking at these teams, just from a broad stroke perspective, Boston College per FPI should win pretty handily. Boston College is given 10.2 points better than the average college football team in FPI. Michigan State is only viewed as being 1 point better than the average college football team. And per S&P Plus, Michigan State is rated similarly. They're only given an extra 0.4 points compared to the average college football team. Boston College is given 3.2 points extra than the average college football team. S&P Plus is less reactive, far less reactive than FPI is, I think, early in the season. And these numbers show that. Florida State was very overvalued, extremely overvalued in the preseason, by myself included, and basically everyone. Like, I don't think anyone expected Florida State to go 0-3, except for someone who was biased against Florida State. And it happened, and Boston College was a big part of that. As for Michigan State, many expected them to lose to Maryland. It looks like they could have lost to FAU in week 1, but here they are at 3-0. These two teams have exceeded expectations. They are, I think, efficient at punching above their weight class. Bill O'Brien has worked wonders in college before at Penn State. He was a coach in the NFL for many years, and some didn't know if he would adapt to the college game and utilize what Boston College had in store for him, what Jeff Hafley left when he departed to become the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. Well, Bill O'Brien and his staff have utilized Thomas Castellanos' rushing capability and also his passing capability rather nicely. Castellanos is currently top 10 in QBR. As for Michigan State, you have Jonathan Smith. You have their offensive coordinator, Brian Lindgren, defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi. I think they make up one of the best staffs, not just in the Big Ten, but in college football. So, two underrated teams who are well coached going head to head. And when you look at points per play margin, which really just subjectively, really this early, once you get further along in the season and these numbers even out, subjectivity of the fact that points per play margin per teamrankings.com doesn't adjust for strength of schedule, it all sorts itself out because, well, these teams have to play in the college football playoff, and by the time that 12 teams have to be selected for the playoff, you will see how dominant they are in their average performance. And even when strength of schedule isn't taken into account with that, you can look at potential power before the national championship and playoff happen, and you can get a pretty darn good idea of who can win the national title. For example, Michigan was number 1 in points per play margin last season for much of the year, and they ended up winning it all. And Georgia was similar in 2022 and also in 2021 in that regard. And you can go back further and see a strong correlation between the best teams in not potential power, but in points per play margin, and the best teams in college football. Michigan State and Boston College are not the best teams in college football, nor are they close to being the best in points per play margin, but they're about the same. Michigan State has a 0.089 points per play margin edge when looking at, well, their average points per play margin against each team they play. And for Boston College, it's a 0.083 average points per play margin against the teams that they have played. Both of these teams have played 3 games. They have not had a bye yet. And they've each played an FCS team. Duquesne for Boston College and Prairie View A&M for Michigan State. So these teams are pretty rested. And while Michigan State's dealing with some injuries in the secondary, I think Boston College is relatively healthy, just looking at things from a broad angle. You look at the fact that Michigan State has a strength of schedule rate of 57th, game control rating of 41. Boston College is the 13th toughest strength of schedule and a game control rating of 16th. Here's where you begin to see some disparities. Boston College is more tested because of that Missouri game, and also what's skewed a little bit toward Boston College is the fact that when they beat Florida State was still viewed as a top 25 team by a lot of computers and by some people even after that Georgia Tech game. After that Georgia Tech game, I still thought that Florida State was a fringe top 25 team. Obviously, turns out that they weren't. That's why they're 0-3 now, but we didn't know that then. So I look at these teams here, and Boston College is more tested. The fact that they're at home and they've controlled their games better. They've been very dominant, running the football, controlling the clock. Castellanos with his legs and his arm has kept Boston College in football games in control. They did that against Missouri, for example, where they only lost by 6 points. And Castellanos was taking advantage, and I mean taking advantage of that Missouri secondary. So it makes sense why Boston College is favored by 6.5 points. I think that is, very fair, to be honest. For Michigan State, what they have to do is slow down Boston College's rushing attack. Both Castellanos, Robichaud, Ward, and also that offensive line, which for Boston College is one of the better offensive lines in the ACC. That's what Michigan State has to do. Will they? It's a tall task. I think Michigan State has the defense to potentially do it, specifically the defensive line, where despite the fact that they lost Derek Harmon and Simeon Barrow, they have looked good through 3 games there. But Boston College has NFL caliber players like Drew Kendall at center on the offensive line. Who would have thought it? Boston College with NFL players. But it's happened before. You look at Matt Ryan at Boston College. This time, you don't have Matt Ryan at quarterback. You have Matt Ryan at center in Drew Kendall. And then Jude Bowery, Logan Taylor, Jack Conley, Ozzie Trapillo. They have an awesome front 5 on that offensive line. And they have some backups, too, who I guarantee you, with some seniors in there, have playing experience and can hold their own. And then Robichaud ran for 1,000 yards last year. Trayshawn Ward has made himself be known, particularly in that Florida State opener, but also just in general with how he has ran the football. And Turbo Richard, as a true freshman, has gotten active in the rushing attack as well. When you look at Boston College, their leading rusher on the season is Trayshawn Ward with 153 rushing yards. Robichaud's had 121. Thomas Castellanos has had 97. He's been sacked 5 times. I believe most of those times that he got sacked were against Missouri. He had 2 sacks, was sacked 2 times by Missouri, 3 times by Florida State, and Missouri did a good job of containing his rushes. He had a long scramble of 7 against the Tigers, who I think have a ridiculously wicked defensive line. It's the secondary where the Tigers have a bit of an issue. But Boston College has averaged 5 yards per carry. They've had 5 rushing touchdowns, 618 rushing yards. And Castellanos has passed for 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's averaging 10.9 yards per pass attempt, and his receivers are averaging 16.5 yards per completion. He has a 204 passer rating through 3 games and a QBR that is top 10 through 3 games. And as for Michigan State, their defensive line and their linebackers and defense in total has already had over 10 sacks on the season. They had a pick 6 against Prairie View A&M. They have a few interceptions and passes deflected, all with a banged up secondary, where Dylan Tatum is out for the year, and I think there are some other players who are out. We'll get back to the defense, though, for the Spartans and also the Eagles in a few minutes. But first and foremost, I want to get to the offenses here. Michigan State's only advantage is at tight end, where they have Jack Velling, who is a future NFL tight end being developed at Oregon State by Jonathan Smith and his staff, and transferring over to the Spartans when Smith took the job in East Lansing. That's about it, though, for Michigan State. Michigan State could have the argument of having a better wide receiver core than Boston College, but I think that goes both ways. Nick Marsh and Monterey Foster are the only players for Michigan State who have over 10 receptions. Marsh has 11, Foster is 13. Marsh has 232 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Monterey Foster Jr. has 113 receiving yards and a touchdown. For Boston College, their leading receiver is Lewis Bond with 10 receptions for 156 yards and a touchdown. Reed Harris has 3 receptions for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns, with an average currently of 49.7 yards per catch. That's nuts. That number's definitely going to come down, but we have seen players like Tyler Harrell, I believe was his name before, were at Louisville, I think in, 2021, or maybe it was 2022. I'm pretty sure it was one of those years, I forget. He had like 20 yards per reception on average, and that was consistent throughout the whole season. Just speedy guy, didn't work out at Alabama, but it just is what it is. I mean, Ja'Cory Brooks, after having a good year in 2022, had a down year full of injuries at Alabama in 23, and then transferred to Louisville, where so far he's doing pretty well, and I hope he continues. But outside of tight end and wide receiver, outside of receiver collective for these two teams, Boston College does have a clear edge here. They have the better quarterback. Castellanos has thrown more touchdown passes, fewer interceptions. He's used his legs more, and he's just the better quarterback right now compared to Aiden Childs. He's completing almost 10% more of his passes than Childs is. He's averaging 3 yards more per attempt than Childs is. Childs has thrown about 28 more times, but nonetheless what Thomas Castellanos has done is very impressive, and I trust him more with his legs than I do with Aiden Childs. And when you look just at the sack numbers, and sack numbers don't tell the whole story, but they tell part of a story. Boston College has allowed 6 sacks with only 57 passing attempts. Michigan State has 92 passing attempts, and they've only allowed 3 sacks. Granted, the best D-line that Michigan State has played all year is nowhere close to Missouri's defensive line. And Florida State's defensive line probably has higher potential players and more high-octane players on their line than anyone that Michigan State has played does. But Florida State has chemistry issues on defense, which is why they can't put all that talent together. And as for Missouri, when your secondary plays as poorly as they did, well, that can kind of alleviate the pressure that your defensive line can put on an opposing quarterback. I also look at, this was difficult because I love Nate Carter and I love K'Ron Lynch-Adams, who each have around 200 rushing yards or averaging over 5 yards per carry and have a rushing touchdown. I love them. But Treshaun Ward and Kai Robichaux and Turbo Richard, they provide better depth. Treshaun Ward did well at Florida State, well at Kansas State, looks to be getting in his own groove at Boston College, and Robichaux is a proven 1,000-yard back in a Power 4 conference. Nate Carter has not hit 1,000 yards yet in a season in his career, and Lynch-Adams at 1,000 yards at UMass. So Michigan State could have the better running back room, and they may prove that this Saturday. But I think right now, based off of what we've seen, I got to go with Boston College there. And it's the same thing with the offensive line, where Boston College, look, they're averaging 5 yards per carry right now. They faced some wicked defensive lines and held their own and controlled games. As for the Michigan State Spartans, they're averaging 5.9 yards per carry against much weaker defenses. And I have to lean Boston College. They have better NFL players. The interior of these lines, I think, is stronger than the exterior. I think these offensive lines are better at run blocking than they are at pass blocking. Like Drew Kendall, Jack Conley, Logan Taylor, I trust more than Jude Bowery and Ozzie Trapillo. And as for Michigan State, I trust Tanner Miller, I trust Kristen Phillips, and Luke Newman more than I do Brandon Baldwin and Ashton Lepo. That's the offense. When you look at the defense here, Michigan State is better on defense, objectively. They have the better defensive line, the better linebacker room, and when it comes to defensive back, that's where I begin to half my questions. Florida State has an offense that's far worse than Maryland's, and that might be as bad as Florida Atlantic's. I mean, Florida State's offense is awful. So there's not much you can take away from Boston College holding them to 13 points. I mean, Memphis did a better job against Florida State's offense than Boston College did. The only thing you can take away is Boston College against Missouri. Now, Missouri scored 27 points, but Missouri kicked 4 field goals and I believe had 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. They had over 400 yards, and Missouri started out very slow and looked rusty, but then quickly got their act together and pulled away and controlled that game in the second half. So there's an argument for Boston College. There's a proposition that they could have the better defense, but I like what Michigan State has produced on defense so far this year more than Boston College. You look at Michigan State, they have 11 sacks, 4 passes defended, a forced fumble, 4 interceptions, and a pick 6. Boston College has 5 sacks, 12 passes defended, 3 interceptions for a pick 6, and a forced fumble. For Boston College, their leader in sacks right now is Donovan Ezuraku. I definitely butchered that name. Please pardon me. And then Neto Okpala and George Rooks also have a sack each. For Michigan State, their attack is a lot more diverse. Chris Bogle leads the team in sacks with 2.5. Jordan Turner has 2. Ken Talley has 1.5. And Ed Woods, Daquan Deuce, Alex Van Sumeren, Cal Halliday, and Anthony Jones each have a sack. Joe Rossi has rebuilt this defense, reformed it in one season. What he has done is no doubt impressive with the Michigan State Spartans, and that goes, say the same with Jonathan Smith and this entire Michigan State staff, and also with Boston College and their staff. Boston College has a great defensive line. I think Michigan State's is better and perhaps more importantly deeper, but both of these defensive lines are good and very underrated. I think Michigan State's clearly better at linebacker. Defensive back is a push because Michigan State's injured there, and that's still, I think, clearly their weakness on this defense due to all the previous seasons of horrific and porous secondary development, and the fact that, you know, they allowed Prairie View A&M to have success on them through the air. Billy Edwards had success on them through the air more than Roman Hemby and his offensive line did on the ground versus Michigan State when the Terrapins played them. And overall, Boston College has, again, played Missouri, who has Luther Burden and Brady Cook and Mookie Cooper. Missouri's non-negotiables their passing offense. And Boston College, while not doing great or even good against that passing offense, was able to hold them in check enough to remain within striking distance for much of that game. As for Michigan State, if they were to play Missouri, I would probably have had them perform at a higher level in stopping the run than BC did, but I don't think they would have held Missouri, the Spartans, would have to 4 field goals. I think Missouri would have scored touchdown after touchdown, especially through the air on a Michigan State secondary that's better than it was last year by a lot, but that's not saying much. That unit is still vulnerable. Jalen Thompson is a player to look out for on defense. Same with Maverick Hansen on the defensive line for the Spartans. Jordan Hall, Jordan Turner, Charles Brantley are some players to look out for. Same with Angelo Gross, Ed Woods in the defensive back room. And as for Boston College, you got Cam Horsley, George Rooks, Neto Akpala, Donovan Ezuraku. I'm just having a hard time pronouncing that last name. I'm so sorry. And then Davion Crouch, Cam Arnold at linebacker, and then Amari Jackson, Carter Davis, Max Tucker in the secondary. Let's talk about trench play and special teams. I think trench play here is pretty darn equal. I think that Michigan State is a better defensive line, Boston College is a better offensive line, and the interior of the O-lines are close. Tackle is close. Defensive tackle, I would say Boston College has better D tackles than DNs. For Michigan State, based off of what I've seen, I'd say they're pretty equal. I don't exactly know. I think Michigan State has better defensive tackle depth, but Michigan State's had a lot of success in getting pressure at defensive end, linebacker, and defensive tackle. I'd say the trenches of these two teams are equal. Though if I had to choose one, I would choose Boston College, like if you put a gun to my head. But we don't do that on this show. If there is a push, if there is an area where there's a little bit of, well, there's only a little bit of separation, or there's a lot of wiggle room in a massive gray area, I think we should be comfortable saying, you know what, both are good there or both are bad. There's going to be another matchup that determines the winner. For special teams, I'd pick Michigan State here. They have a really good punter in Ryan Eckley, a great kicker in Jonathan Kim. Boston College is outside the top 100 in special teams efficiency per FPI, and Michigan State's in the top 25. So trenches and special teams, trenches are pretty equal. Michigan State, I think, is the edge at special teams. And as for coaching, maybe this is incorrect, but I think Michigan State is one of the best staffs in the country. I think Jonathan Smith's a top 10 head coach. I think that Brian Lindgren and Michigan's offensive staff are top 10. I think Michigan State is a top 20 defensive staff. And I think Mike McDonald is a top 5 strength and conditioning coach. Bill O'Brien and his staff, while clearly underrated compared to what people thought of them in the preseason, and right now they're 2-1, competed with Missouri. They're undefeated in ACC conference play, and they could do damage in the ACC. Their staff's good, but I don't think it's elite or near elite like Michigan State's is. I'm very bullish on the Spartans staff. And that, along with the fact that I think Michigan State roster-wise can punch above their weight class and come close to being toe-to-toe with Boston College, is why I'm giving Michigan State the edge. Boston College is favored by 6.5 points. I think Michigan State covers the spread by 9.5 points. And I think they win by 3. 23-20 being the score. Boston College, I think, will do fine through the air. What I think will surprise some people, though, is the fact that Michigan State with Nate Carter, with their offensive line, I think Michigan State will actually run the ball more effectively when you look at the stat sheet. Maybe the stat sheet's deceiving, maybe it's not, but I do think that Michigan State will actually outrun the Eagles here. And Michigan State has a strong interior offensive line and a strong running back room, but Boston College is a strong defensive line. And it goes the other way too. I mean, I would not advise being a betting man on picking which team is going to outrush the other. I'm pretty sure, though, given the state of these secondaries and also the quarterbacks and how they've passed the football, I'm pretty sure, especially with it being on the road, and the fact that Aiden Childs is, still a young QB, younger than Castellanos, I think Boston College will have more success through the air, especially when it comes to big plays. I think Boston College will have more success through the air. They've proven that whether it's with Ward or their receivers, they can create big plays with their quarterback in the passing game. Michigan State's proven that too, but I think that with BC and Michigan State having similar secondaries, similar wide receiver rooms, and then Castellanos being the better quarterback through this point and it being on the road, and Michigan State, they may be looking ahead to Ohio State. I still think they win, but if Michigan State's going to win this game, it's going to be because of the fact that they're able to scrape out another one. And I think, how do they do that? Superior special teams and trench play that can go toe-for-toe against Boston College, and a better game plan from a better staff that helps them to overcome that equality and that neutrality in the trenches, to turn that into a slight advantage, and also to do better on defense than Boston College does, and maybe even do better through the passing game, even though I think BC is quite an underrated wide receiver core and quarterback. Thank you to my Patreon members for sponsoring this video and channel. I want to give a shout out to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman Patreon members at $25 a month. If you sign up as a Heisman for 6 months at $25 a month, you will get signed free College Football with Sam merchandise of your choice delivered to you, plus access to my weekly college football picks, straight up and also against the spread. You get access to the picks, just not the signed merchandise if you're an All-American member at $10 a month. Thanks to Chris Slayton, Little OH, Ismar, Tyler Nye, and Chilton Cush for being All-American members. And if you just want your name featured at the end of every video with a shout-out, sign up as an All-Conference member for $5 a month. Thank you, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Steele, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all conference members. The links to my merchandise store and my Patreon page, both ways to support the channel, are in the description and also down below in the pinned comment. And I also encourage you to join my Discord via the link in the description and also in the pinned comment. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.